Hello.
Hey, Barry.
Hello. So
Hey, Tace.
two people. So I'm going to have my vegetable soup. So I'll be listening and eating.
Cool.
It takes some time because it's at the highest temperature at the moment. So
Perfect.
Let's see.
Hey, Glenn.
Let's see. You have a planned topic today, don't you?
Hey. Hello.
Yes, you. As written up by Glenn half a year ago.
Yeah, I remember now.
That's right. I wrote that enormous post half a year ago.
And Stacy promised to read it.
Right. Yeah. She said she'd read
She promised to read it for me.
Yeah, right. For your
Instead of for Glenn.
Sam's benefit, right?
It's way too long, but there's some interesting stuff there. So
Well, I thought it was well organized and well presented, even though it is lengthy because some of the things, are quite involved.
Yeah, definitely. I had an idea for today for the format. What if, as an introduction, I read some excerpts from that post to sort of warm us up? And then the idea was that you and Doug can sort of do most of the talking, and I can be a little bit like a facilitator, ask a few questions. And I thought that the rest of us can really just ask questions. So you can sort of really have a dialogue about this. That sound like a good plan?
That's entirely acceptable to me. In fact, this was driven by your offering, so I think your thoughts about how it goes is fine. Good.
Great. And do you know if Doug has said anything?
Well, he did agree to the time. I'm assuming he has the link. It's been on GCC now for years.
Maybe one of you should send him the link now, just to be on the safe.
I will send it to him now then.
Here's Joshua. I'll let him in. Sam.
So let me send it to the barn raising group. Okay, link in chat.
So before he comes, I haven't been able to be here for a few weeks, but was there something you discussed last week that sort of brought you to consider this subject again, or wanting to return to it?
Well, I think the last several meetings / months, in my mind, we've been converging. And there's been some convergence around, well, actually, it's been going on for longer than that, around focus, which I think has to come first. And then the second thing that I've been gravitationally orbiting is agreement. So without focus, almost no conversation, nothing can be done. Without agreement, you can't get beyond one person, in my opinion.
You're Stacy.
Yeah. So I think those are foundational. Those are, well, even more foundational than that are already agreements. Like, what time are we going to talk? What language are we going to use? Are we going to listen? Are we going to talk over each other? Those kind of things. So I think that plus focus, plus agreement are foundational, in my view. But I'm probably speaking out of turn because Doug's not here yet.
Right. And then there was this notion of leadership, which I know that he had written several articles together with Fabian something. And so the title of that post was Leadership and agreements in the Generative Commons. And I thought that was a pretty good title. I don't know if you feel that that's a sort of a good title for a topic for today.
Wherever you want to take it, because I think you're the one that put all of these things together. You're the one that sort of pieced together the pieces from Doug and from me and sort of have that perspective. So I'm happy with however you want to guide this conversation.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because I think that this is sort of a one version of a deeper theme. It seems to me. I don't know how to describe it, but it has something to do with structure versus space or freedom. I feel that that's sort of like an overarching theme that's very important for all kinds of human systems and projects and collaborations. And so, you know, it's this idea of minimum viable structure, but there's also this, you know, deep wish to be free from all these structures that just can, you know, limit us, and all these associations from the past, which can, you know, dampen creativity. And yeah, so I think it's really a very big topic, and it's interesting to see if some kind of synthesis can be found.
That would be good.
So yeah, while we're waiting for Doug, I could share the screen a little bit and just sort of show the notes that I've taken.
Go ahead.
That sound okay? Just to sort of warm us up. Colin is also arriving, I believe. So okay, I can do a brief screen share maybe. So yeah, you see this?
Yes.
Yeah, so basically these are just some notes. Leadership and agreements in the Generative Commons. So I just put out a few parts of this longer thing, but I thought it was interesting to define the Generative Commons. What I mean, I'm thinking about something similar to this expression, the liminal web. I don't know if you heard that, the intellectual deep web, the sense-making web, you know, the Consilience Project, Game B, the STOA, something like Open Global Mind, many of these kinds of initiatives that are designed for making sense of the world, and you know, certainly some figureheads like Schmachtenberger, Jim Roth, Jordan Hall. Well, I mean, there's several Nora Bates, and I mean, there's a lot of people connected to this. I kind of feel that GCC is also a part of this whole space. So I sort of defined it as decentralized groups of individuals and networks existing under many names, full of people with big ideas for system change and new paradigms of thinking, typically sharing a belief that some kind of cultural evolution is necessary if we're going to have a thriving, worthy future. So a hope of collective intelligence and ability of sense making, and envisioning new possibilities. So it's this connection between sense making and co-visioning, which is quite interesting. I kind of feel that that's a description of the space that we're in. Don't know if you've heard anything from Doug yet, but
No, but let me try and send him a note directly between him and me. I'll check and see if he is joining.
So he agreed to join, but he isn't living up to his agreement. Is that the situation?
yeah. Agreement is one thing. We also have to actually honor the agreements. That's the topic in itself. It's easy to agree on something, but and you have to follow through.
Breach of expectations.
Sound
Yeah.
Irish, Glenn.
What do you say, Irish?
Yeah, the way you
Do
said
I
you
look
really
Irish?
followed through. Sounded Irish to me. Sounded like one of my
Yeah.
ancestors.
I guess maybe I'm feeling a little Irish today. Huh?
Are you?
What does that mean?
I don't know.
Just diction.
I did listen to some folk music this morning.
Yeah, Irish are basic folk, I guess.
Oh, they have a
Actually,
beautiful
while we're
language.
waiting, does anybody want to check in?
Well, we survived the ice storm here in Metro Boston.
Cool. Is there still snow on the roads?
Well, they've been scraping it off, so and then they put down ice melt for the stuff that didn't scrape off. But
So
yeah,
is there
you can still see. a
snow
little-
on the sides of the roads.
Oh yeah, yeah. Here where I live, I think we got approximately an inch, maybe 2 inches of crusty stuff. It took them three attempts to completely remove it and then throw down some ice melt at the last
Is it
minute.
still white on the side, or is it starting to get?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. As I look out the window where there's no plowing or anything, yeah, there's just it's like frosting on a cake. It's about yay thick.
So it's still
completely
pretty,
white.
in other words, before
It's
all
pretty,
the
yeah.
lost and dirt.
It's
has gotten
crystally
lost.
looking, yeah, very crystally.
Nice. That's postcard type pictures.
Yeah, nothing in the trees though. The trees didn't retain any of it. It all landed on the ground.
Okay.
That's a good thing.
Oh yeah, I mean, I suppose there were some power outages, but very minimal.
So I'll check in a little bit. I had a really fascinating dinner with a good friend of mine today. And when I got back here, it was probably around 9:30 or 10. And I found out that my neighbor here, who just bought the house about a year ago, and they only come every weekend or so because they live 5 hours away. They've actually turned that house into an Airbnb getaway location. So I found that there was this crew of, I don't know, 8 or 9 fairly young adults. They're probably like 3 women and 5 or 6 men, having a party over there. And while I was letting out my dogs, they met me. So they invited me, and all my 4 dogs went over there, and they loved my 4 Goldens. And I went over there and started telling them stories about the island. And I don't drink very much, but one of them's a bartender, so she was making drinks. So that was the first time since I don't drink very much, that was the first time I had something they call an old fashioned. I don't know if you guys drink that, but so I had a couple of those. And,
Anybody thinking Karate Kid here?
What?
Miyagi?
I couldn't
Miyagi
quite hear you,
guy?
Colin.
Karate
There was a
Kid,
scene
you
in
mentioned.
Karate Kid where Miyagi, that's what I'm thinking. Miyagi gets really drunk one time. He tells a bunch
really?
of stories.
Yeah, supposedly
Go on.
Asians can't handle their alcohol.
Yeah, I'm just picturing a funny scene, but continue on.
Anyway, I remember the night. They're pretty friendly people. And I just told them that I had a conference call this morning, but then after that, on my Saturdays and Sunday mornings, I go up to a room where I have my big Infinity Kappa 8 speakers, and I blast, like Beethoven symphonies or Rachmaninoff or, Mahler or Brahms. That's what I like to do on weekends. That's how I
Oh.
melt away the hours.
So that's kind of how you do after these talks usually, or?
There's Doug.
I do that often, yes. Yep.
I think Doug has arrived.
Yes. There we go.
Hello.
Doug, good morning.
Unmute.
You're still on mute, it looks like.
Can I just check if my audio
Hello,
is working?
Stacy and gentlemen.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, Alex, we can hear you.
Good.
Yes.
Wasn't Kayla here a minute ago?
She was.
She's not here anymore.
Maybe I bored her to tears with my check-in. I just kidding.
All right.
She'll probably be back.
Anybody
Well-
else want to check in while Doug is arriving? Well, if not, Glenn, why don't you introduce what we thought we might want to do today? Or Doug, if you feel like checking in before Glenn does that.
No, ready, willing, and able, but I did see Stacy flash a hand and a finger.
Yeah, but I think that was for Alex, because I think Alex was trying to check in, but he was on mute and didn't realize it. Alex, did you want to check in?
I would briefly, I've spent the last 48 hours trying to fix my internet connection through Google and Facebook password retrieval and updating the operating system. And it's been a nightmare at my age with this new technology. You know, it's, while I've been in the background happily using Facebook and chatting to people, the technology has been stepping forward without me. So it was difficult to find those settings and verify all those identification requirements that they now have with operating systems and networks. It's become a nightmare. It's become a quagmire of privacy invasion tools used by the big tech companies, all trying to protect each other's data. So I've got an issue with that because I've got an administration account and a personal account, several different accounts, and I log in with the wrong one on the wrong side and they've got me in trouble using multiple accounts. They're calling me all sorts of strange names and God, it's a nightmare. Anyway, that's been trying. So, but I'm getting there. I've got a new machine, new system, and it's all set up. What I'm using Ubuntu. I'm on Linux, and I haven't got my Zoom account correctly set up yet. I'm on the free account with the browser, so I can't change my backgrounds. I've only got these, default backgrounds that they give you with Zoom.
No, I have a free account. You can change it.
At least this settings won't let me. I'm using Zoom through the browser window. I haven't got Zoom loaded on my system.
You don't have the desktop.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, that's enough
Well,
from
you're
me.
doing well.
Over.
You're doing well. You're here.
We can hear you.
That's
Yeah.
That's an achievement. So there you go. Congratulations.
They won't get rid of me that quickly.
Great stuff. Okay, so I'm just gonna jump into it then. So the idea that I had was, first I can read a little bit, some excerpts from this post just to warm us up, because this was inspired by some several years of conversation where I heard many things said by Doug and Sam. So it's sort of a little bit of my interpretation of it, but at the very least, it's a starting point for a discussion. And I call that post "Leadership and Agreement in the Generative Commons." And I'll say a few words about what I mean by that. So the idea I had was that I'll just do a little introduction, read a few things from that to warm us up, and then I hope that we will have a dialogue where Sam and Doug can mostly have a dialogue between you two, and the rest of us can maybe ask questions now and then, and I'll maybe do a little light facilitation if it's needed, but sort of like the two of you can just have a dialogue about this and see where it goes. That sound good? Okay, so I'm just gonna begin by defining what I mean by the generative commons. So this is, I think it's a pretty nice expression. There's other expressions like the liminal web, the intellectual deep web, the sense-making web. And I think we could say that GCC groups and these kinds of meetings are a part of this whole loose network. So we could call them decentralized groups of individuals, networks. There's many names. A lot of people who have big ideas for system change, new paradigms of thinking. And there's typically this shared impression that there's some kind of cultural evolution that's needed for humanity at the stage we're currently in. If we're going to have a worthy, thriving future, there's some kind of something new that needs to emerge. And I feel that the generative commons is this big field of people who are exploring this. And there's a hope that our shared intelligence, ability at making sense, and envisioning new possibilities can help assist this transformation. And it's a belief in conversation as a tool to do this. And out of this, there's a larger space of generative conversations, which aim towards increasing our intelligence and wisdom. And there's also, can be also many specific projects that can arise, sprouts, creative projects of various kinds. So that's sort of what the context here, where this question of leadership and agreements is being considered. So it's not being considered, first of all, in the classical corporate environment. It's considered in the context of what we call the generative commons. So the topic here is kind of the role of ideas, memes, words that have a lot of history, baggage, mental associations, many of them rooted in traditions and paradigms where control, authority, power over others, this sort of mentality is very ingrained. And there's a lot of baggage. And there's also a lot of gold. So there's also some rich knowledge in these traditions that we don't want to throw out. And there's also been a lot of work to have a renewal of the meaning of these ideas. So there's new versions of leadership, new versions of agreements that have emerged. So you could say that we're seeking to be free from burdens of the past while retaining and enhancing gifts and insights and wisdom of the past, so that we can adapt and evolve to present and future benefit. So then there's new evolved visions of what leadership could mean that's based on participatory and decentralized structures. I'm sure we're gonna go into that. So there's a lot of work that's been done by system thinkers, etc., to reform this notion of leadership as an idea and practice. So here is sort of just a brief description of what I see, what Doug argued and what Sam argued. So I'm just going to read what I wrote. Doug argues that words and concepts such as agreements and leadership have been so contaminated by associations to old control and power over paradigms through the years, and automatically evoke certain psychological reactions, so that in the current situation, we would do best not using them at all. Avoid evoking them altogether, not invite them to the party. We should instead try to re-language such expressions, ideas, and structures, something that can free us from the baggage of the past, and that can open for something new from a place where we can channel our energy flow and attention into the emergent moment now, so that we can allow a natural creation of something new and appropriate to the situation. So there's an ability to intelligently create and respond to what is needed from the ever emerging present moment without attachment to the baggage of the past or expectations of the future. And another big idea that I know is important for Doug is that along with this freedom from past and future is a freedom from fear. So this is also one of these ideas that we looked at, and that if we can be free from the past and future, free from fear, it enables a different kind of generative, free, attentive, contributory, creative way of being. And that it's in this way of being that real collective intelligence is leveraged. So that's sort of one view on this. So then there's this other view, which I feel Sam has argued towards, that something like agreements and leadership has acquired new meanings, and that these are very different from the older centralized models of thinking, where we can see leadership as being not based on hierarchy and control-based paradigms, but more on agile, non-hierarchical, participatory, decentralized kinds of collaboration. And with this vision, leadership means presenting possibilities, starting initiatives, inspiring action, and following through. While agreements can be flexible, project-related, continuously negotiated, without needing to be enforced. And also many of these kind of approaches, which we could consider agile, have proved themselves to work in decentralized networks. And then leaders and followers are self-selected. So you don't need official titles, you don't need any of that. And another argument here is that experience has shown that something like agreement and something like leadership seems to be necessary in the distributed decentralized networks, if anything effective is going to happen. So there's also then a few pitfalls and concerns that we want to avoid, right? So on the one hand, we want to avoid that good work and attention gets captured by monetary interests, power struggles, ego-driven impulses, that something contributory is degraded into something transactional, which leads to corruption of essential purposes. And that something can get hijacked, watered down, right? And this has been seen many times. Then there's another concern. That is that we just sit around and do nothing, that we babble, ruminate, speculate, endlessly repeat the same things. Sometimes, give lip service to agreements and ideas, but not being able to effectively follow through. And then if that's the thing, then over time, people begin feeling bored, frustrated, concerned their time and talents is being wasted. There's a lot of petty drama that can sort of arise, distracting, diluting the attention and the energy. The conversation space can sometimes degenerate into gossip, repetitions, useless discussion, but really with little interesting or creative work happening. This is one of the reasons why focus has become this big word as well. And that has a demoralizing effect on the community. If we feel that nothing happens, we were just sort of going around in circles. So I think that these are, a few of the concerns that are very real concerns. I mean, we've seen this many, many times. And so it's a real concern. And I'm just going to end by saying here what Doug's perspective seeks and what Sam's perspective seeks. So just interrupt me if this is too long, but I think it could be useful. Doug's perspective seeks to retain the free agency and creative open spontaneity of the emergent process, unburdened by the attachments to conceptions, terms, and models that evoke associations of power over, ego, manipulation, and control. We could instead act from a service, in the present moment, awareness, a wish to contribute without expecting something in return. And then each individual contribution can enter the field of awareness of the community as an idea. This idea can begin bouncing between people. It can reform itself emergently until it finds a form that naturally inspires shared interest and engagement. And this is where a new sprout can emerge, a new initiative, and the realization and further development of the initiative can also proceed in this same kind of free emergent manner where no power over or control is needed at any point. So it comes from a here and now present moment awareness, a mindset of service and contributions, no expectations or demands for what is to follow later. And of course, the beauty of this freedom from expectation, from the notion of time, is that it can enable this freedom from fear, which is this big idea, which I'm sure we'll touch upon. And then something emergent can appear, which is appropriate to the situation. And then Sam's perspective here, I feel, seeks to benefit from group memory and minimum viable structures so that you can coordinate and inspire collaborations at different scales. And then you can utilize the benefits of agile, emergent leadership and agreement practices. And in this view, leadership can be something that happens on multiple levels of a network by multiple people. It doesn't need official roles or titles. People can choose to be leaders and people can choose to be followers. And everyone in the network can be both a leader and a follower in various projects and initiatives. While agreements are viewed as something that can be renegotiated, improved, and adapted continuously, written in electrons, as Sam has said a few times, and you don't really need enforcement mechanisms. Instead of enforcement, you can rely on personal responsibility, and you can improve and renew and renegotiate agreements, tasks, and initiatives. So in this paradigm, it seems like the role of leader is someone who presents possibilities in a way that inspires action and directs energy. I think it was Stacy who once came with this expression, energy director. So it's sort of like leader as an energy director, while a follower is someone who voluntarily chooses to support an initiative that they believe in. And then the role of agreement is a minimum viable structure to coordinate the action. So then I'm almost at the end here, but I've also thought I would say a few things about a common purpose, because I feel that there's a common purpose here in these paradigms. They both seem to share the goal of having a creative, generative, decentralized commons that can work for responsible agents that can organize, disorganize, adapt to shifting circumstances, and be able to effectively work on various, projects and initiatives. So we could say that a creative and impactful ability for decentralized collaboration is a big goal here. And then it seems that something like agreements and leadership seems to be necessary in these networks if we're going to have coordinated, effective action and work to happen at scale. And at the same time, something like a fundamental freedom seems to be needed from the associations and traditions associated with agreements and leadership. And maybe these words aren't the right words at all. Maybe we want to find completely new words. But we want to find something where people are actually able to coordinate effectively around common purposes. And so, yeah, I think that sort of describes a few of these ideas. And yeah, maybe Doug and Sam can just have a dialogue now, and rest of us can listen, and we'll ask a few questions now and then. Does that sound nice?
If I may, could I ask everybody else other than Doug and me, did that make sense? Was there any part of that that you still need to have Glenn repeat or clarify?
I think Stacy raised her hand. Oh, that was thumbs up, sorry.
I'll take silence as an indication that, Glenn, you did a good job of presenting that and setting context.
Thank you, that's great.
I noticed a little bit of what they called political speak, like saying a lot about, there was a lot of talk about uniting and decentralized uniting, but they're two opposing things, really. So there's a conundrum there that I find it's difficult to get to without leadership, without a hierarchical leadership. At least if you spread that leadership out over everyone, then there's a responsibility of leadership with every one of the people in the group, in the mesh, in the network, on the planet, the global grid. So over, that's all.
Cool.
Great.
Doug, would you like to have any kind of reaction to what Glenn set as context?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, Glenn, bravo. I'd really like to acknowledge you for, I think, getting it in all of the dimensions and moving parts. Like, there was no English in there. There was no stir-ins or add-ins or biases or tilts or it was a very, very comprehensive, very clean. Like, I'm perfectly content with your expression of my frame. And no adjustments, no tweaks, no corrections, no anything. Like, you got it, at least for my purposes. What's interesting in getting it played back and the intervening time from when last we were sort of in the cage and now is on my part a lot of time deepening and unpacking pieces of the puzzle that we're talking about here. And at least for me, I think being able to better clarify the sort of whys and wherefores in relation to, my advocating transcendence of leadership, transcendence of agreements as constructs. So there are a couple of cleanups that I think are probably that might be worthwhile, helpful. I think the point, Alex, you raised is right, and I think it's a little bit of apples and oranges.
A little bit of
So
what?
a little bit of apples and oranges. I don't see in the frame, in the sort of playing field that you're framing, decentralization seems sort of not on that field. In my, sort of in my relationship orientation to what we're diving into. I think and if it is, then it adds dimensions that the frame that I've put forth are not speaking to. It treads into domains about consolidation and concentration of power, control, authority, or ownership, projection of ownership. And there are all sorts of real, I'd sort of put it all in a bucket of the political dimensions, right? And I'm not as attached to the politics piece in relation to the sort of center theme that my shares have spoken to. So my sort of center of focus is the domain, the realm of humans co-creating together. Like that's the simplest, most specific framing of the subject that all of my shares are really sort of referencing, leading to. And we can look out the window and witness how the way we have co-created as a species has resulted in lots of adverse and negative and destructive consequences. And the inquiry for me was, and still is, how do we do us better? How do we do our co-creation differently in service to and actually having consciousness, explicit consciousness, explicit alignment, explicit resonance and balance by and between the people co-creating together around, on one bookmark end, the values, which inform and speak to the way they are going to co-create together and the way they're going to relate to each other and our world in that co-creation process, on one hand, and in alignment with a common purpose on the other. So in service to what? And in that frame, the in service to is obviously informed by the values at the beginning of, on the left-hand side of the creative space in the middle. So, the underlying motivation driver for me is, in contrast to the, it's the classic Einstein quote of, you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. That we need, on some fundamental level, to change not the who, what, where, when, why, and how, but on a fundamental level, we need to change the orientation that we arrive to co-creation with. And so that's, I offer that as sort of a deepening of the frame within which my previous statements and contributions and thoughts have been held. That's become clearer, at least for me. In the context of humans co-creating together, there's sort of the obvious mechanical, practical, corporeal, manifest objects and materials that are part of and play a role in bringing something into manifestation. I think the old paradigm was very much focused around that realm. The dimensions that have been left out, sometime back around Descartes and Newton, were all of the intangible, ephemeral, energetic, experiential dimensions of living beings co-creating in an ever-changing, constantly shifting, moving, flowing reality as a dynamic process, which is about the verb dimensions of co-creation. And is also sort of centrally about energetic flows and balances in that process of co-creation as a living thing, as a living process, not a mechanical process. And adding that, incorporating and reintegrating that into humans co-creating is also at the center of my take. So it's not prescriptive or projective in the context of the how, what, where, when, who, why involved in co-creating. It's really sort of on a meta level saying, if it's not whole being and if it's not incorporating and integrating the living dimensions of how human beings as beings co-create together, then we're in the old paradigm. And effectively, we have not changed anything in our way of relating to co-creating together. So I just offer that as sort of addendum and I think clarification and augmentation of how I'm oriented and where I'm coming from in framing facets of the new. It's not a declaration of this is the new or this is the replacement for, but it's really about expanding the field of view.
Yeah, that was clarifying. So we could say that the old paradigm, as you describe it, is characterized by this absence of this human energetic dimension, with the untangible, ephemeral, maybe hard to define, yet incredibly important for what will be created. And if that's absent,
sort of clapping with one hand.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a sort of that's a useful clarification, I think, with this the paradigm, the old paradigm versus the new, or the thing that's missing, I guess we could say. So yeah, Sam, wonder what comes up for you.
Okay, so my first comment is, I actually don't believe that deep down, Doug and I are very far apart. I do believe that on the shallow surface, it does appear so. And I do think there are significant differences, but they're not impossible to overcome. And I think a lot of it has to do with terminology. It has to do with what we think is old, what we think is new, what we think is structure, what we think is all the implications around the words and terms that we use. So let me introduce a couple of things, okay? And I would actually like to reverse the use of the words old and new. See, from where I sit, what Doug, you're talking about with respect to structure and hierarchical structures and power and control over and all of that, that to me is the new. That's not the old. That's actually been exemplified by recent government structures, the recent runaway success, quote unquote, of capitalism, of corporatocracy, etc. But if we extend our memories back tens of thousands of years, the old is living consistent with nature as villages, as people who support each other, as resilient networks and social structures. That's the old. The new has corrupted the old by imbalancing the energies, the structures, the flows of capital, the flows of recognition, of compensation, of reputation, of power, of influence. That to me, I see as the new. And that has created the cancer on the earth that I've seen, which didn't exist when we were living more consonant with a planet. So yes, if you only look within the last few hundred years, you could call those structures, the power over structures, the old structures. But if you take a look at the tens of thousands of years of history, those are relatively new in the sense that they've had imbalanced effects on the environment. So when we say we'd want to eliminate the old, I'm saying I want to eliminate the new. I want to get back to where we were. So that's the first notion that I would introduce. The second notion I'd like to introduce is, I noticed that you didn't speak of it, but I think Glenn spoke of it, which is this notion of fear. To me, I see a long evolutionary process where we learn how to do things together, where we learn things about the universe, where we learn how to create, and co-create. And this is an evolutionary process. I think it's very human. I think it's very natural, okay? I think that what I hear from you, and it's probably an unfair characterization, but I'll say it anyway, is a strong rejection of a lot of the technologies or learnings that we have come up with over the last few hundreds or thousands of years, because we have not learned to use them responsibly. And so to us, it looks like it's quote unquote bad. So that resulted in a strong rejection of what you're calling, power, of technology, of agreement, etc. And to me, and this is very personal, strong rejections, strong reactions come from trauma. We have had social trauma. We all know that the distribution of assets is grossly unfair, at least here in the US and in other capitalism-driven societies. So there is a trauma that is causing us to reject it. So I do think that if we recognize that trauma, if we recognize that that is also fear-based, then we can have this more evolutionary perspective and say, well, let's tweak it some. Let's learn from it. But none of that is possible if you reject the notions, you reject the terminology, you reject the lessons learned, you throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is what Glenn was introducing in his context setting, okay? So to me, there's a more nuanced, there's a more sophisticated notion of how do we build from what has happened in the last 100,000, 10,000, 100,000 years? What can we build with that? Because it's a natural evolution, rather than saying, I don't like what's happened in the last 200 years, so I'm just going to reject it. I'm going to just not use those words at all, okay? So to me, the words of agreement, I have to believe that, tens of thousands of years, a similar word has been used to say, shall we meet down by the fork in the river? Or what time are we going to have breakfast? Or can you take this pile of wood over to that shed over there? Okay, there have been agreements and language built around agreements naturally. I can't imagine society creating itself without those kinds of notions, okay? I don't imagine a new paradigm rejecting those notions. In fact, we wouldn't be here unless we agreed on this particular time and this particular technology and this particular language and these particular protocols of interaction. Those are already agreements. And we can't have intellectual or emotional or co-creative interactions without those foundational agreements. So I don't think agreements is the problem. Focus is also not the problem, okay? So when we talk about minimum viable structures for what we want to co-create, there's listening to each other, there's understanding each other, there's understanding what one means when one says, I will write this down, or I will take this action, or I will address this topic. Those are all agreements already. And some of them are implicit, like the language that we use, whether or not we listen versus talk over each other. We've evolved those protocols and practices, and those are agreements, okay? Now, I think the word agreement triggers some because of the contractual and punitive notions of agreement. But one says, I don't want to agree because I don't want to potentially suffer the consequences of someone enforcing a non-compliant behavior with that agreement. And I don't want that. So therefore, I will not agree, even though the agreement in its original intent was a co-creative one, right? Let's create this garden together. Oh, but what happens if I don't work on Saturday morning? And somebody's gonna come and says, you get half the breakfast because you didn't work on Saturday morning. I don't want that. Therefore, I'm not gonna agree to work on this, this neighborhood garden. That to me is setting aside a good purpose for a secondary fear. And that's allowing fear to drive our behavior. Agreements come out of co-creation, of positive imagination, of positive co-visioning. And to let fears around coercion, around enforcement, prevent us from taking those co-creative agreements is cart before the horse, tail before the donkey, whatever you want to use those words, but it's letting secondary issues prevent us from doing the primary good. So that's what I would see as the side of agreements that we want to jettison. Now, in talking here, I'm always talking in the context of autonomous beings. None of us work for each other. None of us are paying each other, to my knowledge, okay? So none of us have those power and control influences on each other. So I don't get to say, you have to do X, Y, Z because otherwise I'm not gonna pay you, right? We're not in that context here. We're all here freely choosing our participation here. So I freely choose to say, if there's an agreement that I think is co-creative and positive and good for society, okay, and a good foundation to build on, I will engage with that agreement to the clearest possible expression of it that I can put together. And that kind of requires understanding of mutual language, mutual protocols, mutual misunderstandings. And that's why definitions and those kind of agreements are also important and necessary. So there's agreements up and down the entire discourse that co-create this agreement that we can actually then enact together. So those things to me are important. So there's a fear of consequence that causes us to reject contracts and agreements, but I'm saying there's already notions of agreements that are positive and co-creative and have existed throughout all of human history. Okay. The next thing I'd like to introduce is this word of decentralization. To me, decentralization is a secondary or tertiary concern. It's not a primary one. Okay. I don't believe in decentralization for decentralization's sake. I actually prefer the word autonomy, because autonomy recognizes that we each have sense-making capabilities. We therefore each have projections of what my behavior could create. We also have our own individual notions of what others' behavior will create and the possibilities that we can co-create together if we have agreements. That to me is autonomy. That to me is what I would like to leverage. So if it's decentralized, it's because each of us sees those potentials differently than others. And to the extent that Glenn and I see a possibility, we make an agreement, but we're still autonomous individuals. And the fact that Glenn is here at 8 o'clock in the morning Pacific time says he's come to that agreement and engaged with it and actually delivered that part of it. There was no discussion of consequence. I didn't say, Glenn, if you don't show up, I'm going to be blah, blah, blah. There was no discussion of that. So the agreement notion that I'm proposing here is free from these fear constructs. Now, is it free from consequence? No, it's not. Because if Glenn didn't appear, or if you didn't appear, then the possibility that was in the agreement, the thing that we could have co-created, doesn't happen if one of us doesn't actually then hold to that agreement. That's it. That's the only consequence. Okay? There's nothing I'm going to do to Glenn. There's nothing I'm going to do to you. It's just that we, as collaborating individuals, if we want to use that term, lost an opportunity. Those agreements are opportunities to co-create. And if we value co-creation, then we should value that notion of agreement. That's the way I see this whole thing of agreement and decentralization and autonomy. The next thing is this word leadership, which is in that title of the article that Glenn wrote. And I just want to say, Glenn, you captured very well my distinctions on this notion of leadership. Leadership, again, has evolved over tens of thousands of years throughout all of history, okay? I don't want to reject leadership because we've learned a lot about it. It is the presentation of possibility. It is the inspiration of collaboration and participation. And there are old implications of management / leadership that, yes, come with those consequences of punitive consequences, of enforcement, of, shame, of guilt, of bad reputation, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all the fear-based constructs that come around this notion of leadership. We should evolve our understanding of leadership and revert back to what I feel the village notion of leadership meant, and reject what's been recently, like in the last few hundred years, come about as this notion of management or leadership or dictatorship, if you want to use that word. Okay, reject these quote unquote new notions. And what this provides me is a way to introduce a new topic, which I didn't hear Glenn cover, I didn't hear you cover, which is that all of this in a dynamic soup of human society, okay, creates multiplicities of opportunities for co-creation. But if it's done without understanding each other, if it's done without understanding the sense in the language or the words or the speech that we use, then they set up expectations which may not be appropriate. And those inappropriate expectations lead to disappointment. And disappointment, people feel, is saddening, it's bad. I actually don't think so. It's actually a very natural part of human evolution. But to actually understand those possibilities of disappointment, to value minimizing those disappointments, is my motivation for wanting clarity, for wanting sense making, for wanting clear understanding around agreements, for wanting clear definitions. And that's why I think memory is important. Memory is how we actually recall past conversations, past agreements, past history, past hurts, past traumas, past old patterns. That's memory, okay? And if we want to share any of that and clarify it and improve on it, then to me, group memory is important. And to the extent that we don't value group memory, then we're only relying on individual memory. And then these missed expectations, disappointments, misunderstandings, different definitions will persist. And that will generate more disappointment. And I would prefer to see less disappointment than more. So that's why I value things like definitions, clarity, group memory, agreements, okay? And so I just want to present that notion of disagreement as opportunity. It's opportunity to co-create a better future by clarifying these misunderstandings, by clarifying what we mean by certain terms, and setting more appropriate expectations. My next notion is this Einsteinian notion of not happening, of problem solving not happening at the quote unquote level or thinking of the previous. I think that's a given, right? I think if you continue to think the same old thoughts, you're going to come up with the same old conclusions. And we thought what you thought was best in the past is still going to be the best now because nothing new has happened. That's kind of like tautological in my mind, okay? What I'm thinking here is the way you get past that is be open. Be open to new ideas, be open to new information, be open to new models, be open to new scenarios and co-creation. But unlike the implication of that Einstein quote, I think it's not a major step function that happens rarely. This is something that needs to happen all the time, every day. This is the outcome of a learning mindset, one that's continually open to thinking new things, continually open to interacting with other people who think differently, continually asking the universe for new information. And if you do that, then you expand your thinking. You don't think in the old ways, you start thinking new ways. And unlike these magical step functions, which are behind this meme that gets shared, I think it's something each of us with a learning mindset do continually, daily, in fact, multiple times a minute if possible. The last thing I'll introduce is this notion of the Tao. Okay, to me, the interesting thing about what we want to co-create is not necessarily to leverage the best ideas from everyone and just leave it at that, okay? Now that may seem misguided. What I want to see happen is the best, if we can actually think of it, okay, for the planet. Now, when it comes to thinking about the planet, or whatever system we're thinking about that's bigger than individuals, okay? There's a possibility that the individual's interests and potential may not be about 100% realized. And to me, that's okay. So long as the larger system, the planet or civilization or the biomass or anything, it's that we have in our minds, not whether or not Sam has realized Sam's potential. But if what I do makes me take a step back, and that's better for the planet, and that's better for society, and that's better for civilization, I will gladly do so. That perspective is more thinking globally and acting locally. That's the dot in the Tao. That's the white in the black. So for me, it's not about individuals becoming their full potential selves, no, for me, it's that in a context of the entire system, the planet. Now, I think it may sound like I've gone on a long time, but these are key distinctions, which I think, if understood, presents my view, not my view, but the view that has been characterized as mine, okay? And Doug's actually in consonance. It actually brings a unification to it. But I think that these are necessary clarifications in order for that to become possible. So I've gone a long time.
That's great.
I've addressed a lot of what has been talked about, but I'll stop now. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. This is awesome. Very rich. So Doug brings this context of humans co-creating together, and you bring this context of what is best for the planet. Those two together is quite interesting. I'd love to just go a little into this word leadership. But first, Alex had something. What was it you wanted to say, Alex?
I was reminded of the Vulcan mythology in Star Trek. You know, when the Vulcans were trying to explain to humans the philosophy behind their philosophy, and that brings home to me the essential elements of intelligent design when you're thinking about human communities' interactions, with all the philosophy and psychology involved in being a human and relating human relations with other cultures, especially, because that is one of the key ingredients, I think, in evolving intelligently to respect the environment and the way the environment is being utilized for the benefit of the whole, not for the benefit of the few. Over.
Great. Okay, so I have a question now, since we came into this word leadership, and because I've often heard, yeah, Sam, do you have something?
Sorry, I was wondering, before we move on, and I know you're going to ask some good questions, I was wondering again whether any of what Doug said or what I said provoked any misunderstanding or tilted heads among people who are here that are not Doug and me and you. Okay, then sorry for interrupting, but back to you.
Yeah, Alex?
Focus is the thing about focusing on leadership, or focusing on decentralization, or focusing on focus, is the fact that you have to believe what one idea is better than another and focus on that idea and bring that into the group and say, I'm going to support this because I think I'm responsible enough and have enough background information, scientific research, to suggest that this is a good idea. That's all. Over.
Yeah, that's a good segue into this topic, because I guess with leadership there is already then something that emerges from an understanding or an impression in the situation that right now this is important and some energy needs to go in this direction. And I've heard many say that one of the problems of the, let's say, modern society is that we have very little leadership, and that there are no leaders today. I mean, I've heard this several times, and I think there's something to it. It's somehow it's missing in the society we have, and so I wanted to just bring out this idea of leadership as, you're in a situation, you see in a larger context, you see an opportunity, you see a need, something to be created, yes, but it's like something that it needs to push sometimes. You need to just get started. And sometimes you need to share a vision with others and share it in a way that inspires action. And sometimes you sort of need to put yourself out there and take a risk. And this is important. It's like making a commitment. This is important. I see an opportunity here. This is something that I like to see in the world. And you sort of communicate that outwards. And maybe also more, you take on a responsibility to carry through with it. So, and it seems to me that something like that is very necessary. Otherwise, it just becomes a little bit here, a little bit there, but there's no direction. If something needs to be created in the world, it's often a hard process. It's a lot of work. It needs to be followed through. I feel that that's where leadership comes in. Maybe there's another word, but I feel that there's a great need for it today, and there's not much of it actually. I would say that if there's one thing that's typical of, let's say, corporate culture, it's that there are no leaders. It's very stale. And so, yeah, I just kind of want to bring that out and hear what Sam and Doug have on this. So, Sam, you have something there.
Yeah, it may not be obvious, but for, let's say, about 15 or 16 years, I've been one of the co-chairs of something called the Silicon Valley Engineering Leadership Community, or Circle. And it's because I've been a part of that, where we explore these notions of management and leadership and structure and organizations, that at least for over a decade, we've evolved new notions about what it means to lead. In fact, we have a term, leading from any seat. We have a preference for using the leadership word over the management word. We've actually evolved beyond the old hierarchical notion of leadership into a more nuanced, let's say more human co-generative notion of leadership, because it's the presentation of possibilities, it's the inspiration for alignment and channeling of action that is the preferred notion of leadership now. And so many times, when Doug says, let's reject this notion of leadership, I have this reaction because I don't want to reject this evolving notion of leadership. Yes, I agree with Doug, we need to reject the aspects that are negative, that were, let's say, control-based, enforcement-based, etc. But really, if you look at leadership, those elements are not central. Those are more secondary issues. The primary one of leadership is, where do we want to go? What do we want to do together? Here's what I want us to think about. And that you can do from any seat. Now, the flip side of that is, in whatever other seats that people are sitting in, they should be open to these possibilities. Because you're not going to foster this notion of leadership if you are thinking, oh, well, I'm only going to listen to my boss, or I'm only going to listen to the guy with the title, or I'm only going to listen to the loudest guy, or the one who's, on the biggest font and the biggest newspapers, okay? It takes a responsibility of those listening to say, wow, that's a good idea, or geez, that's bullshit, okay? Those are autonomous actions, okay? And if you're actually indeed saying, oh, that's bullshit, do some thinking first, do some listening and thinking. But if it is bullshit, call it bullshit, but at least lean in first, okay? And I think those notions could help us co-evolve a notion of leadership and reject the old negative implications of it.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Doug. But first, let Barry say a little.
Yeah, I'm responding to what Glenn said a bit ago about maybe leadership is not the best word because it has negative connotations of power and control and authority. Is there a better word? And I'd like to suggest that there is a better word. And in fact, Sam kind of talked around it. This gathering here, we are gathered here together to have a discussion. And Stacy likes to call these things a call. And if you have a call, you have a caller, somebody who calls a gathering. The notion of calling a gathering is a very old idea. The person who calls a gathering in one very old language is called a kohelet. The person who suggests, let's have a gathering to discuss something, not necessarily well-defined. And that became one of the very oldest books ever written. And the first word is kohelet, which is the character who initiates the gathering, who initiates the call. And that book got translated into Greek. And in the Greek, the word that got translated from the gatherer is Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is a word in Greek that means a gathering that exists because somebody called together a gathering to discuss something. So what Sam is suggesting is the gatherer, the sort of the chairman of the session, is going to poll the gathered and say, what are your interests? What are your emotional states? What are your needs? What are your requests? And poll the entire community to find out, where are we? Where are we emotionally? Where are we in terms of unmet needs? Where are we in terms of unaddressed requests? And so looking at a diagram like the one that Colin had put up, where you have, for every individual, you have a constellation of interests, of values, of unmet needs. And if you have this collection from all the members of the gathering, you might find a center of mass, like a Venn diagram. Everybody has their own individual sphere of Venn diagram. And the question is there a common, non-empty point of mutual overlap? Is there at least one point where we all have at least some common interest? Because if not, then you're going to have what's called schismogenesis. People are just going to drift away because there is no common overlap. And you may have an overlap where 90% are agree and then a few don't, and they're going to drift away. So it occurs to me that what we need to be doing in a gathering like this is, can we identify a common overlap in the collective Venn diagram, where we can all agree that, at least with respect to this little piece of the universe, we all are attracted. This is a point of attraction for everybody and not a point of repulsion for at least some people. And you can look back at GCC and you can see that people have drifted away. And that suggests to me, diagnostically, that we didn't find a common point of overlap where we all said, yes, I want to be there. I want to show up. I want to contribute, because we're all going to be contributing to something that we all agree is worth contributing to. It's worth the effort. That would, to my mind, would be not only a new idea, but also an old idea, because it goes all the way back to Ecclesiastes, which was, here we are all together. We're all in the same place on the planet at the same time, in the same lifetime. What should we be doing together collectively so that we can live long and prosper?
Great. Sam, did you have something to add?
So make sure Doug doesn't want to say something first.
Doug, go for it.
So yeah, so I'll work in reverse. So Barry, you sort of hit the nail on the head. A person who says, let's get together, isn't a leader, they're a gatherer. They're calling for a convening. It is an action step. It's about doing something together. There is zero projection in the invitation. Let's get together and discuss something. That person isn't saying thou shalt. That person isn't saying thou shalt not. That person isn't saying, and this is what we're going to talk about. That person isn't prescribing or projecting anything onto another. So the essential difference in my orientation and everything that's been said is that, first of all, I never said anything, and haven't actually all the way along. I have not excluded anything. I have never rejected anything. What I have spoken to is not using language that intrinsically is rooted in power, control, authority. What do I mean by that? I don't mean bosses, CEOs. I'm not talking about a superficial, flat, two-dimensional binary. What I mean by taking power, control, authority out and not using language that intrinsically equals or means that is that it involves projection by a person or persons over other people. It's directive. It's impositional. That energy, which is ultimately fire out of control on an elemental level, unbalanced fire, where I'm exceeding the boundaries of my agency, authority, power, and control, which stops at my skin. So if I believe I am justified, entitled, whatever the rationalization is, for imposing on another person, that comes out of, is afflicted with power, control, authority, and is rooted in fear. It's rooted in a belief system and an energetic system that has winners and losers. It's rooted in a system that has competitors. It's rooted in a system of scarcity because I get and you don't. It's not, it's an abundant world and we all get if we can figure out how to do that in service to each other. They are completely oppositional, foundational, energetic frames of reference. So if I live in a fearful, competition-centered, scarcity-rooted, people that haves and the people that have nots, if I'm rooted in that whole frame and belief system, then power, control, authority is how I got there, and power, control, authority is how I stay there, whether I'm the one imposed upon or whether I'm the one doing the controlling, projecting, and imposing. So, and our culture, our whole Western culture is rooted in that. So once upon a time, and Sam, your mentioning of old, I reference in terms of ancient, but indigenous populations know how to do this from an abundant frame without power, control, and projection. The Kogis don't have nouns in their vocabulary, they have verbs. Everything is a living, interconnected, dynamic system, and they are part of it, in harmony, alignment, concert with it, in connection, sensed, felt connection with it. And in co-creating together, they organically know and feel and sense is what we are about to do in concert with everything else around us. Or is it destructive, extractive, consumptive, violent to it? Now, in the five elemental tradition, and it's really important to distinguish the five versus what came later, which was the fours, where they dropped an element. It's really interesting why that happened. So in the five elements, which are what comprise reality and everything in it, tangible, intangible, ethereal, and other, you have earth, water, fire, air, and space. Space is undifferentiated. It is source. It is from whence everything comes, and it's energy. It's the most etheric and ethereal, down to earth, which becomes the most grounded, the most fixed, the most manifest, the most tangible. And each one of the elements brings its own energetic quality and flow as contributing to whatever the manifest reality that's presented. Things that are destructive or consumptive or extractive are not related to as in need of reduction. Fire out of control or unbounded and balanced is not related to as something that you reduce or take away from. It means in an abundant frame, not rooted in fear, but rooted in love, that an element is missing that needs to be brought in. So it is always additive. It is always a positive energy to balance, to restoring balance and restoring generative flow. And it really is ultimately at the end of the day about maintaining generative flow. And if things stop flowing, you got imbalance and you have problems. You have the haves and the have-nots. And you have people killing each other instead of caring for each other. So in an abundant frame, the inquiry of what's needed carries with it, based on a values alignment as the foundation and cornerstone for everybody involved in whatever the collective context is, what's needed in service to self, others, and the planet. It's sort of intrinsic to the co-creative inquiry. Always, all the time. And carrying that into the co-creative inquiry, I don't need to check on whether you and I are in agreement about anything because we already start from there. We're already aligned energetically that we are going to create in service to. We are going to co-create in a positive, constructive, contributive, directed manner, not in a destructive, competitive. So fundamental to this is it's not about me. There isn't a me and you. There isn't a difference of opinion and disagreement. And there isn't a need for formalization of an agreement, which is an intellectual and abstraction of an intention for two people to do something. What about they just do it together? They work together. And they do that in a flexible, fluid, dynamic, organic alignment that says reality determines in any given moment, moment to moment, in real time, what is needed. I don't need to add anything to that for Tina and I to get together, 20 hours a week and roll up our sleeves and dig into whatever's needed next. We've been working together for 2 years. We don't have an agreement between us about anything.
But Doug, if that is established, doesn't seem to be any problem then with having more specific agreements, for example, between people who live in different parts of the world, and doesn't seem that that's a problem if you have established that common understanding that we're doing this in service.
Saying that
The
you and I
whole-
schedule a time to come together today at 11 o'clock to embark on this dialogue didn't require an agreement. When are we getting together? 11 o'clock. Done. What the fuck? It doesn't require elaboration. It doesn't require a huge record of what we've done in the past to verify that what happened if we were both there. If we both experienced or experienced success or failure. It's like there's this obsession with adding all of these layers.
Yeah,
All of this intellectual abstract needs that are based on and derived from our own ego constructions of, look now what I can do with my brain in abstract and intellectual thinking and construction. It has nothing the fuck to do with the moment of co-creation.
I get it.
The moment of co-creation is something we do as a verb.
So we overcomplicate it, right? If we're
we're in love. We're in love with our ability to create all this shit, which is intellectual. Now, I am not rejecting people thinking. I'm not rejecting people co-creating, surfacing emergent new insights, awareness, consciousness, understanding.
So on the one hand, you can make an agreement, but you don't necessarily have to make a big fuss out of it, right? I mean, you don't necessarily have to make this whole overlay of abstraction on top of it. That's kind of what I'm hearing you saying.
That's not creating, that's the map. There's the map of the world and there's reality.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I'm co-creating in reality with others. I don't require a map. In order to do that, I just have to decide to do that for me. I have to decide who I'm doing that with. I do want to determine, not on a word level, but on an intention level, that their values align with mine and mine align with theirs. And that's as much more in the realm of a felt sense experience comparing notes than it is anything about agreement. Trust, yes. Trust is something that is derived from alignment. That I know you know, or I believe you feel the same way I feel about whatever. But that's a lived, dynamic, energized reality.
Exactly, but at the same time, like, if you're having larger networks, then I think maybe sometimes you need a little bit more of these structures, but maybe not too many, right? It's something that.
If there's a need that you and I and Barry figure out a way that if two of us do something, the third one is signaled, that need emerges, then we meet the need.
Yeah, and then it's not a problem, right?
It's driven by what's the need here now in the creative moment, not projecting a need for a reality that doesn't exist yet, and not imposing a need because that's the way we've always done it. Now, there's this piece of leadership about somebody putting something on the table. At any given time, everybody is source. Everybody can have an idea. Everybody can have something to share. It's like the gathering thing versus the leading thing, right? And in that context, I know in our frame of reference in 2B Elemental, everything that somebody experiences that comes up for them, whether it's an intellectual solution, a mechanical solution, a technical solution, an emotional reaction to something, whatever is living for each person in the room is of value to the whole. It's received as a gift. So the standing invitation is, if something comes up, if something occurs to you, like, got something to share. And everybody there is in service to everybody else. So honoring that, okay, what is it? And getting to understanding and full appreciation of it. There's no judgment of it. There's just a take it in, receive it. And if it's a challenge or an issue or a trigger for that person, it's a gift to the whole to be fixed and addressed by somebody else in the collective. Never the person who experienced it. It's somebody else's job to address it. But it is addressed immediately in real time because that recoheres the team and gets everybody back to co-create. But if I arrive carrying all this stuff that I know, and I arrive carrying all this projected vision of a future that I'm looking to get everybody on the page with, I'm primarily preoccupied with my own shit. I'm not in the present moment open, receiving, listening, paying attention to, fielding, and connecting with everybody else in the room.
Yeah. Well,
You can do one or you can do the other, but you can't come with an agenda, come with a carry, come with something you're on fire and energized about, and do anything other than project on the other people in the room.
But wait a minute, because I think this is a little too simple, because you can have an idea, you can have a strong vision, but it's a vision about a direction that seems interesting, and you don't necessarily have to have a clear idea about exactly how it's going to be. I have these situations occur very often for me where I have a feeling of a certain direction. This seems interesting. This seems like an interesting direction, and I want to communicate that. And if other people then think, oh, he's just doing his own thing, he's trying to push his agenda, no, they're misunderstanding.
Well,
it doesn't have to be like that.
If their experience is, though, that that's what you're doing, that's what you've done.
Well,
that's my point. That's my point.
Maybe I have to do it better then, but there is something to be said for, you have a vision of a direction that seems interesting.
We have attachments. We get it. Like, I have attachments. You have an attachment. Sam has an attachment. Barry has an attachment to something.
Yeah, but we can detach.
Our culture and frame is built around that, actually. Everybody has attachments and everybody's projecting onto everybody else all the time, 24/7. And that is exactly the thing that I am raising the question. Could we transcend that?
That's what Sam is saying as well. But this is exactly the point Sam is making when he speaks about having strong views lightly held. So it means that you can have a strong view that you present because it seems like an interesting energy to put in. It seems relevant,
But if my
but it's lightly held.
But
So
that's
it means
hold
if
on.
you drop it-
Lightly held is a distinction in kind. The bottom line is subjectively, if I'm attached to my attachment is the only thing that lives. And you get it or you don't get it. You should be open-minded to it, but if you're not, then it doesn't mean I'm going to give up my attachment.
Yeah, but
And
I'm saying,
the generative moment, no, this is really important. What is that about? That's about me. That's about mine. That's about being proprietary. That's about projecting. That's about conflict if you don't accept it, or if you don't value it, or if you don't acknowledge it. And we're not generating, co-creating anymore. We're in a battle to the death. That's how people end up on a battlefield.
I know that when you're attached, yes. But the point I'm making is it's possible to present a point of view and even present it strongly without being attached. It's possible.
Why would you do it?
Because it seems interesting and relevant to the situation.
But then you're sharing it and there's no energy attached.
I'm not attached to it, but I'm sharing it. I'm putting it on the table.
Yeah, but there's a significant difference in kind if I am floating something on the table or asking questions into something and I have an idea. Like the guy with the gun in Full Metal Jacket. This is my gun. I love my gun. It's not your gun. It's my gun.
I know. There's
So
that difference.
So can we evolve as living beings and get to a place where instead of being rooted in attachment, we are co-creating together from a place of true co-creation. And sharing something is very different than proposing or pitching or presenting something.
Right, so we have a crucial distinction here between sharing something, sharing something in this open way and pitching it in this sense where we are attached. And I really feel that is exactly the point that Sam is addressing when he has this expression, strong view, lightly held, and with having an open mind. So I don't know, Sam, you had your hand up earlier. Do you have something to add to this? Because I think this is a very, very crucial issue. This about attachment versus sharing without being attached. It's a crucial issue.
Doug said a lot, and let me see if I can actually just respond, because we were on a course of conversation where I was understanding your context and Doug's response to it and my response to that. But Doug, in your latest share, you introduced probably dozens of new terms, dozens of new behaviors and models, and even the notion of a values foundation, which were not previously in the conversation. So for me to really respond to what you said, I'd need to understand pretty much dozens of terms before I would, let's say, competently, and reasonably respond to what you just said. But if you just put that aside for a second and just look at the energy with which it was said, I'm asking you, do you see where you're attached?
You're muted.
You're on mute, by the way, Doug.
Unmute.
I absolutely own where I'm reactive. What I'm reactive to. I'm not attached. There isn't a thing underlying that. There's a reactivity to a felt sense of people projecting and or imposing and or rooted in those, doing those things. And rounding off the corners and sanding it down and window dressing it and softening up the edges and all of the rest, but not owning the fact that the fundamental energy and core is projective. And calling a spade around that, the nature of that as rooted in the power, control, authority, violence, aggression. It's a me over somebody else. And I speak, for the most part, I think probably 95% of the time, in the first person. I don't invoke we because I don't speak for anybody else. And I don't project or impose my thoughts and feelings on anybody else for that reason.
So just for my own clarification, did you feel that I was projecting over in this session?
Well, your share after mine, there was massive projection. You attributed me saying things I didn't say, rejecting things, excluding things I never said, and I didn't represent. There was a lot of a version of me that you heard that did not reflect or represent anything that I had shared, that you carried into that framing. Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So was your last share, the one before this one, an attempt to lean into and clarify any of that?
Well, the conundrum and the challenge is I actually receive, acknowledge your version, your right to your perception, including your perception of me. So I don't call into question or challenge anything that you felt, experienced, heard, and then reflected back and represented as not very real and true for you in terms of what you experienced. That was your truth. So it's not in my frame, in my orientation, that does not equal you, number one. And so it's not about personalization, right? There's Sam, and there's Sam's perception and sharing and words and whatever that you bring to the table. Now, I came at it not from about what you said or anything that you did. I came at it from, this is the energetic essential piece in leadership, in agreements, in the subject domain that we have on the table, that lives for me as a thing of the old paradigm, modern industrial paradigm, old paradigm, whatever we want to call it, that if we can't transcend it, we're going extinct. We're going to kill each other and our planet, and we'll start all over again. But attachment and ownership and competition and winning and losing and leading, which just intrinsically says, if I am the leader, somebody has to follow me. Otherwise, why do you need the leader title? Unless you're ultimately looking to project the need for a follower. And somebody has to intrinsically in that concede to a person wearing that hat as saying what, where, when, how, why, and how high. It's just intrinsic to the word. And you can come up with 5,000 variations in colors and attempted elaborations, but that the word equals on an emotional, felt, substantive basis, a projection onto others, a direction onto others, an imposition on others. And then getting into the concept of self-leadership, like, why can't I just be? I make decisions for me. I'm not leading myself. In order for me to lead myself, I need to follow myself. I'm now two people. Why do I want to do that? Well, why do I want to do that? Why would I ever want to? Why do I need to do that? Like, how hard do we have to work to buttress and keep this leadership word up? There's so much work being devoted to saying we need the word. My response is that word is going to kill us. What that word carries substantively, energetically, its meaning, its intention, its whole foundation is rooted in adversity, conflict, competition, power, control over the leader and the led. It's just fundamental. If I step in front of a room in a workshop or in a presentation, and I am the presenter or I am the facilitator, guess what? The minute I'm introduced as that, every human being in the audience autonomically and instantaneously shifts their whole state of being, their consciousness, their physical presence, their energy into following in our current culture. They turn off whole parts of their brain. They turn off certain discernment functions. They turn off the things that involve me being in control of me, fully aware, present, and responsible for processing everything on every level that's going on around me. I just went into supplicant mode. That's how intrinsically embedded it is in our culture. And you can see it. The person introducing goes, our facilitator, Doug Brett, and I'm looking out at the audience and faces go blank. I'm off the hook. I can just sit here and listen. He's responsible. He's carrying the load. I'm just going to go for the ride. Now, you and I said something in slightly different ways that we both, I believe, firmly are in alignment on and agree with, which is every single human being is responsible for helping with solving what's facing us. Everybody's on the line. We need everybody to help, to contribute, to pull in the same direction, or we're not gonna make it.
So Doug, it sounds to me a little bit like what you're describing has very much to do with attachment on a deep level, attachment to an idea, almost as if I turn my mind off a little bit and let the mind get enveloped into some kind of idea about some kind of role. So it becomes sort of automatic. It becomes sort of very restrictive. And
it changes your whole view of reality. The reality you are going to receive and perceive will be informed, defined, and affected materially by those beliefs and attachments.
And I'll also say that often when I hear Sam speaks, I feel he underestimates this, our tendency to become hypnotized by some kind of abstraction. It's an enormously powerful thing, and we can see it everywhere.
Each one of us is a hugely powerful God of our creation. Each one of us creates our individual unique world. I create mine. I open my eyes in the morning and my world is a reflection of my beliefs, my understandings, my knowledge, and it's mine. And
So
it's not
being-
yours, and it's not yours, and Sam's is Sam's, and Tisa's is Tisa's. And now, if I'm interested in helping and contributing, which I am, being part of the solution, not part of the problem, I'm also really interested in trying to have awareness and consciousness of the reality before me as clean and unconstrained, undistorted, uncolored, unfiltered as humanly possible. What I've learned empirically is I better not come into the room carrying anything. I better not have any attachments. I really have to be empty. In the Tao sense, I really need to be like a blank sheet of paper. If I really want to receive and get an accurate understanding of what's before me.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. I mean, that's an enormous thing, though. I mean, let's not forget that if we're going to be able to come in and be completely free of attachments, it's an enormous thing. I think it's worth striving for. And I also think there's many degrees of attachment. It's like you can be a little, because you can be attached for a moment, but then you can detach.
Correct.
But
and there are
it's
infinite things to attach to.
Yeah.
And it's like whack-a-mole.
It is. But that is important, because if you're speaking to someone who's completely attached to an idea and can't get outside of it, it's like there's no possibility for a real conversation. But if they can detach for a moment, at least,
look at the United States. Look at the United States. 80 million people are in this alternate, literally, to me, an alternative reality. To them, Donald Trump is the president of the United States. I mean, like...
It's quite enormous, our ability. But just, there's a few threads here, just didn't want to lose. So, because you said earlier, Sam, that sometimes the way Doug speaks about this, it comes off as rejecting all of these notions. And then Doug said that you never exclude anything, you're not rejecting anything, but you're suggesting to not use this language that ties us into all of this. So then here there's an important thing, like on the one hand, you don't have to use that language, right? But if somebody else uses it, and then you come with this whole speech, that gives a certain impression. Just keep that in mind.
Understood.
Yeah, right. So there's that.
I don't. I'm not saying thou shalt not use the word leader. But if I say, understand, if you use the word leader, this is all the shit you're bringing with it.
Right.
Then at least own that's the shit you're bringing with it.
Exactly.
That's a great
so there's that
admittance to the complexity. That's kind of the rub, isn't it? Like if you want to grab it by the horns, it's going to have some baggage.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't have a problem with baggage. Like I respect somebody's ability to carry baggage.
Okay,
and that's
I'll
theirs.
I'll define baggage as constraints and previous problems. If you've ever read the Wikipedia entry on wicked problems, it'll align you to what I'm thinking about baggage.
And also, one thing is it's baggage, but if you're aware of the baggage, already you're a little bit more detached. So that's another aspect of it, which is important. But I also wanted to not lose another point you made, which kind of was sometimes we overcomplicate things. Like we don't have to have a long seminar about agreements just to agree to meet for this call, right? But I also think there's an important thing here, which is there's a big difference between how these dynamics work with small groups of people compared to large groups of people. That's an important point to not miss, because
Absolutely.
if you have large groups of people beyond the Dunbar number, that's when you really need more of these formal structures. And you know, they have their problems then as well, but it's like this very simple, dynamic, emergent thing sort of seems that works for small groups, but at a certain point you need some other structures. I think, Alex, did you have something you were really wanted to say?
Yeah, this this small groups effect that combine these small groups, you have a big thing happening. So if each of us is the master of our own destiny, the king of our own kingdom, then each of us has an enormous responsibility to go deeper into the agreement and find out exactly what needs to be done. What are the needs that are to be met by the people participating? And the people participating is all the people in the small groups that are connected to the larger network, the mesh, the global collaboration. So that's the simple way of looking at an agreement. I have an individual responsibility. It's just like every one of us has, because I'm the king of my own kingdom and the master of my own destiny. That allows me to see my responsibility to the group in a better perspective. Over.
That's great. Yeah, I think we've
There-
covered a lot of ground here.
You know, there's a friend of mine who writes responsibility as response hyphen ability. That's actually the center of the intrinsic and extraordinary power, creative power that every individual has intrinsically. And they're in the driver's seat, right? I'm in the driver's seat of my choices. Moment to moment in relation to everything and anything, I have the ability to respond.
Yeah, I like that. I
And-
heard this before. Ability to respond adequately. Well, Krishnamurti had that expression, the ability to respond adequately. I really like that definition of responsibility. It's something about responding to the situation.
It's a positive, affirmative,
Adequate.
energetic reflection of the act of. And how am I responding in service, aligned by values to contribute, to create value, co-create value with others, or to serve others.
Yeah, exactly. But I just saw Colin has his hands up. He's been listening attentively. Yeah, Colin, share your thoughts.
Barry might have something to tailwind into what was just said. So
I have a very short anecdote that relates to being perceived as a leader with the various connotations of the word. As many of you know, most of my career, I was brought onto an organization, typically a high-tech organization, to address and solve technically complicated problems that nobody really knew a good solution to. And I would always do my best to find the mathematically sound, best ethical practice, the best recommendation for handling it. And so I would characterize myself as a consultant or a problem solver, and that would seem fine. But I had a manager at a company called MITRE who characterized me as an opinion leader. He saw me as an opinion leader, and that kind of startled me because I'm not rendering an opinion. I'm rendering technically calculated solutions that can be validated, by precise scientific assessments. And yet here it was important to me to know that people nonetheless perceived me, at least this one manager, as an opinion leader.
Those are the moments of somebody externally going, you're contributing great value, and you have a higher level of responsibility, by the way. because it's not like you were going, I'm an opinion leader. It was like, holy crap, I'm an opinion leader.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
I would never put that on my resume.
And it's like, it sort of adds a level of sort of self-awareness and responsibility, consciousness about, what do you say and what are you contributing and what is its power and effect?
This is fantastic stuff. We covered a lot of ground. Just before you jump in, Sam, I wanted to just bring up
Actually, I
one
was going to
little.
jump in too there, Glenn, but go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Go for it first, Colin, and then.
Yeah, I was just going to let Barry sum up what he had because he seemed to have something that would help with what was said previously. So, yeah, I want to go on a little bit about maybe with you to another area of this discussion. Am I reading you properly that maybe we could do a takeaway? Like, I think you're in the middle of that kind of, but
yeah,
I'm also in that mode.
Well, I actually wanted to just mention, I don't know if you're going there, but there's an idea about an information system, which I think is central to Sam's thinking and also Doug's thinking, a better kind of an information system that is human-centered. And I think that's also really central to everything.
Okay, dynamic repository that works.
Yeah.
I think we're totally in line with that idea of navigating information reliably from a personal standpoint that's verified in some sense of the word.
And I think the vision is probably shared. Like your vision,
of course
Colin, your vision in terms of the maps and the media, and Sam's vision of certain working pieces and my CMM thing.
Yeah.
I think they're all different names and a part of the same thing, which is
we're tuned into need. We're tuned
technology
into need,
meeting needs that it can easily meet. Why isn't it currently?
Or frustration. You want to find a need.
Yeah.
Look at the frustration. Right?
Yeah.
Look at and also look at the feedback for people who are concerned enough to listen, right? Because that's a precious thing, right? That feedback, which we've decided not to call criticism. So we have, I think, been charitable to pick our words carefully to not trigger other people unnecessarily. And I think leadership is one of those words. I think agreements is one of those words. And so if we could back away, and I think to a larger picture of, okay, so I could see where I would come in rushing hot to a problem and say I have the solution because I'm a hammer maker, right? I can see that. That I'm not disillusioned to, that we all have our hobby course or our expertise or our lens, you could say, and it's better if you have multiple lenses because then you become less sure. So I'm to the point where I might not know anything. There's so many lenses to look through, but that only goes so far as much as I have to feel a certain comfort that the people I'm speaking to understand the complexity at hand within whatever context we've picked up. And when context flips around like a pancake, I'm kind of like saying, this guy's really not serious about nuance. Now, if it's a big picture conversation, like what are we going to do about somebody's 1960s is calling somebody. So yeah, if we, I guess the idea is what I'm trying to express is that as we come to look at a problem, there's two levels. There's let's stand back and be charitable to each other and understand where everybody's coming from, maybe, if we don't already know, and allow that potential to form out of what Deleuze calls the virtual, I guess. So some people call that God, the virtual, I think, from what I understand. So if you allow the potential to come, the possibilities, and then what we build out of that. But I'm already one step beyond that, saying, well, I've seen people build complicated stuff, and when I'm involved, there's a checklist I have, and I think that checklist is not accepted by Doug because it's out of context. We're both not aligned to that first level. So I would like to see if there wasn't a way to illustrate that so that it's not a contention, but an expectation or let's say, what you would call orientation of what you would expect to have to go through in aligning. Where if somebody comes in saying, well, like I think there's been some people come to the group with their charts and diagrams and say, you know, this is the way we got to go. And, you know, Doug just basically starts to think back about times when he was a boy and playing with the dog and stuff like that. So there has to be a way to align our thinking so that we take each other seriously, I guess is what I'm saying. And whatever charity's involved in that, I think it comes in understanding two things, our terminology and our framing.
And you're mentioning understanding there, Colin. I think it's a very big word, and you know, Sam talked about it earlier. It's very crucial. You know, how can we understand better? And
so in as much, I would say my lesson with Doug is don't really get into the nitty-gritty with Doug until the problem has been better defined.
Thank you, sir.
I do feel
I'm a big fan of that. Like, how about we start with the beginning? Like, what are we serving? What's the need?
Yeah.
And are we aligned, you know, on a values level in how we want to work together and where we're coming from in addressing that need? Because it's sort of an orthogonal dimension to the problem solution world, right? There are a lot of different ways of solving a particular problem. Can the values alignment, energetic alignment of the way we're going to solve that problem, so that we know it's also in alignment with all these other factors, is clear at the beginning.
This is fantastic stuff, guys. I will have to go in not too long, but I really want to say thank you guys for today, because I've understood it better, and just before you go, Sam, I also just wanted to bring in this idea of the information system, because that's sort of how this whole thing could scale potentially beyond smaller groups. And this notion of non-attachment, that Doug's, I think it's central to everything he talks about. And it's you know, everything we discussed earlier about having an open mind and being able to, you know, lightly hold our perspectives. It's a form of detachment. Maybe there's many levels of it, but that opens up a lot of possibilities for new understanding. And you know, we can come to a point then when these issues of the attachment to the old associations with these words become less of a problem, let's put it that way, and we can still benefit from a lot of these practices. So Sam, what are you thinking?
Well, I came here to discuss certain notions, and up until our second and third shares, I thought there was some reasonable progress towards that sense making. In one of Doug's shares, maybe 15, 20 minutes ago, I lost track of time now, Doug introduced a large number of terms and implications in what I took as kind of an emotional expression. And so to me, it communicated that there was a reaction to what I had said. And it seemed like whatever I was trying to say in responding to the ideas that were put forth seemed to me to have been taken somewhat personally by Doug. And to that extent, I just want to say I didn't intend it. I meant to just elaborate certain notions.
Not taken. It generated an emotional response, but it's not. I don't receive that as a personal attack or a personal anything negative.
May I finish?
Yes,
because
absolutely.
from where I sit, that's what a personal response looks like and sounds like. Okay, so it appeared to me that in that response, there were many terms, many things that looked to me like assumptions. okay? Many words that were introduced by you, which, like I said, I would have to elaborate all of them and then try and find a good way to, have some common notes of understanding so that we could actually converse on them. So that to me looked like there was a lot you were bringing into the room that just bewildered me because it would just take a lot of time to unpack all of that stuff. Now, whether or not single words will generate that kind of response, like around leadership, for example, or whatever, we each have different histories. We each have different experiences. So the word leadership does not trigger me, for example. Okay. In fact, I would say management probably triggers me more than the leadership word. Okay. But if you go to different contexts, completion might, abuse might, trauma might, power might, control might, love might. All of those things are individual. So when I say I'm interested in how successful collaboration scales is a very important notion of that. Okay. So where you and I could say, hey, Doug, let's go meet at this restaurant. You don't see that as an agreement, but to me, it is the axiomatic element of an agreement. You don't choose to call it an agreement. Okay. But what I think you are responding to, all the negative aspects of agreements, are what I view as contracts. They go on for 14 pages and have, and this does not in your blah, 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 blah. Okay. Those are all those consequences that I'm trying to eliminate from this notion of agreement, which is why I propose something like a Dictopedia, which is a proactive way for us to say, this is what I mean by this term. This is what I think you mean by that term. And if it's inconsistent, there's an opportunity to clarify, and then we move on. Either choose a different word or use that word in this agreed upon notion. And that's an agreement. That's what definitions are. Definitions are agreements, okay? Now, the most foundational thing I heard you bring in is we don't need agreements as long as we've got the same aligned values. Now, to me, that certainly looked like a presumptive agreement, okay? Without actually spending the time to establish that. So to me, there's value in agreements, even in what you say, but you don't seem to want to acknowledge that word. And you don't want to acknowledge the attempt that I'm trying to make, non-personally, to try and build it up in a way that makes sense. Now, of course, I am unique, probably, you would call me this way, because I have some background in mathematics. I act in my professional capacity as an engineer, much like Barry did. So for me, what I say and what I propose needs to have testability. It needs to pass certain tests. It needs to execute properly, okay? And so it may look like it's extraneous. It may look too formal. It may look like baggage to you. But the way I think, and probably, there's some who would like to look at the components of agreements like, what is the expression of something? And if you evaluate it, does it turn into a true or false value? Okay, it's at that level. So where I have those notions of building up a foundation of understanding and agreements and sense, you view as entirely unnecessary, okay? But it's because I'm trying to figure out how does this scale, okay? Now I agree, okay? This is painful for most people, okay? But if I'm trying to understand it at the most elemental level, these are the questions that I would ask. So I do think that if you are interested, all those terms that you introduced are opportunities for us to re-engage and really try and see if we want to do some sense making. I entered this conversation thinking that from your first exposition, Glenn's context, and mine, that there weren't too many differences, and I saw that they could be easily overcome. But the intensity with which you reacted to what I said suggests maybe it's not the case. Maybe it's a much further schism than I had initially thought, because from where I sit, it's not that great, okay? And so that's what gave me a little bit of surprise on the force with which that response came back. Over.
That piece is responsible for 90% of the failures in engineering systems,
Wait, which piece?
management
Which piece are you talking
structures, like that human piece that reaction, I didn't expect that. Like, I thought we had positions and they were relatively close, and all of a sudden there was a nuclear explosion in the middle
Right,
of it.
but
And
who
and
owns that
that
reaction?
that human part, I do own it, absolutely.
Yes.
But that human part has to be part of the equation,
And it is.
Yes.
And it is.
It is.
But
Yeah.
it needs
right?
to be owned by the human who is
Oh,
hosting that
and-
no,
reaction.
absolutely, absolutely.
What I
And
heard you say
navigated.
is it
And
is someone
navigated
else's
at best
responsibility
with
in the group
liminal abilities.
to address that. And that's what I say is I don't want to absolve that individual of the responsibility to address that trigger.
Yeah.
Okay. It may be someone else's responsibility to assist that. I completely see the sense in that. But to say I am triggered and now it's up to somebody else to, fix me, that to me is not a scalable solution.
Well,
Yeah.
my being triggered, the emotional mechanism being activated, isn't anything that needs to be fixed.
Those are the language.
That's
that was the
actually
wording they
that's a
were using
valuable
earlier.
data point in my frame of reference. Like if I'm sitting across from somebody and all of a sudden the top of their head blows off and they want to throttle me, I want to understand that because I don't want to do that again.
I think Stacy has maybe it relates to this.
Well, yeah, I'll go really quick. I just want to say that I agree 100% with both Sam and Doug in everything they've said. So obviously there's some sort of a mesh there. But early on, Sam said something about strong disagreements triggering, indicating trauma. And I just want to focus on that word strong because, like, for example, I am not triggered by the word leadership. However, I fully understand the baggage that comes with that. And I appreciate the desire to change the word if such a simple change can avoid a lot of conflict. So I think we really have to think about those strong areas of whatever emotional content comes up, not the ones that fall in the middle, which are an indication, or as Doug would say, a data point. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
See, my point, I'll follow up to that, is that every word has that potential for every person, as long as we're scaling this conversation. So if we don't learn how to handle a single word, we're not going to learn how to handle all of these instances. Okay, that's the model-based reasoning. Okay, I understand it sounds extreme, but I'm using one example as an exemplar. Okay, to somebody else, it may be the word enlightenment. To somebody else, it may mean the word woke. For somebody else, it may mean download. For somebody else, it may mean God. Okay, so if we're to go around a very large 8 billion person room and say, okay, let's avoid all the words that people are triggered by, that's not a scalable solution to me. Right. The scalable solution is to really clarify what one means and then say, okay, is that a workable clarification, or are we just not going to be able to collaborate together? And yes, I recognize that it could potentially be possible that I can't collaborate with somebody because they refuse to hold, an agreed notion, and they constantly revert back to what they have as, and yes, I'll use the word baggage around that term. And they constantly bring it into the room. That's definitely playing out in front of us. So my attempt to collaborate is to find those people with whom I can establish those clarifications, those agreements, and those are the opportunities. Now, let me address one more point, okay? Barry mentioned that some people come and go, okay? I have long said for multiple years that GCC is a town square. What happens in town squares is people meet and then they decide to go to a coffee shop together, or they meet and decide to create a book club, or they meet and decide to go and have a great relationship, okay? So the fact that people don't always come back to the town square is not necessarily an indication of any failing whatsoever.
Correct.
So there's no need to have that negative thought around it. That itself is baggage. So I think these are opportunities to lean in. These are opportunities to engage and find those people with whom you want to follow up and have something deeper.
Sure, sure.
Over.
And I think also outlining the failures and our growth and the emergence, like watching how it used to be one way and now it's another. Like, wow, did you see that change?
For me, we've come a long way.
Yeah.
But I'm out of time because my wife, I'm a half hour late. My wife's going to kill me. So I'm going to beg off. But
Let's continue.
I'm
Let's
absolutely
continue
game to
Was that an agreement
support.
with your wife?
I'm
Sorry.
game to support Glenn's quest. If you want to come up with sort of the iterative progression point that we arrived to out of what we just did and pick up that thread, I'm down.
Doug, this
That
was
would be
fun. Thanks for
awesome. Yeah.
coming.
That's perfect. That's perfect. And this to me is almost like someone read the book I wrote. Because
So
it
you
is
are
about the quest.
affirmed.
Yes, well, I don't
Don't
need,
feel
I
validated.
would be honored if Glenn could take the idea of a quest forward between Sam and Doug, where that he has more trust to be more maybe less cantankerous. I'm a bit cantankerous at times.
I don't know that word.
Vehement is the word that Sam likes to use.
I gotta
There's
See you,
go.
Doug.
assumptions
Yeah,
embedded
anyway,
there, too.
Thanks,
thank
Doug.
you. Great to see you,
Thanks,
Doug.
Doug.
Thank you.
It
Thank
was
all of
very
you.
rich.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Glenn.
Josh. Yeah. And I would like to, now that I think the main event is over, I would like to say that this is a reoccurring idea of playing a game. Now I've got some distinct words to put it into this time. I might not be mistrusted by using the right words. So try this out. My vision originally was to have a game of Dictopedia between Sam and Doug and facilitate that. And whatever map or model or workflow you put it in is kind of secondary.
For the record, Colin, I never heard that word. I never heard that proposed in those ways.
Yeah. Well, it was basically, I proposed it as my Dictopedia, which was called the game of discernment, which is the exact same thing, essentially. Except for it's more built as a journey's beginning where you want to go somewhere. So you have to discern something, which I think we're more into. But let's keep it simple and pleasurable with just the game Dictopedia and suck them in. Yeah, because that's what Doug's saying. I think Doug has this idea that it does quickly fall into a contract. And then, like if somebody says, the GC has a rule book, then all of a sudden who's going to enforce the rules? That's a lot of work.
And also,
Well, now
we
this
have
is speaking
to.
about Doug, who's no longer present, okay? But just a reminder, everybody, Doug does have a professional background as an attorney.
Yeah, he
Yeah, that's
earns his
right.
skepticism. He earns it well.
And through all of this, it's also this theme that we can see how every single word has various different meanings depending on who uses them, when they use it, etc., which again shows that we really need to lean in on each specific occasion and understand what do you mean with this word now as you say it in this statement. So that's kind of where we come into the more situationally specific.
So if I'm not mistaken, I just kind of heard, similar to what was discussed today, that you've been tapped as a leader to follow these discussions with.
Right.
And I think we can facilitate you if you want to take up that challenge, because having the ability to have people buy into your idea, I think is a great advantage to actually possibility of success. Now Barry may have some rules we must consider, because I think we've tried to look for better before. So I would consult with Barry closely in this endeavor.
We also came up with the
I
word
think it'd be fascinating. What do you think, Josh?
gatherer.
Two different worldviews, biggest hearts in the world, trying to find a way to glue the yin and yang together. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's an interesting project. Alex really wants to
Still
say
need to
something.
glue them.
Alex, what are you thinking?
I'm just, marketing.
Alex, we
You gotta
can't
think you
hear
gotta
you.
be-
I think you have to unmute. No, yeah.
I'll be quiet with that.
We can't hear you, Alex, for some reason. Yeah.
You've lost your mic service. Your audio
Seems-
service has failed.
Seems the mic ain't working. Anyway,
If
I
it's
gotta
USB,
go,
you can hear
guys.
us.
But
Okay,
Unplug
But
and
it
plug.
this was,
Hey, Glenn, I want
yeah,
to make sure that I again acknowledge the time and thoughtfulness you took to actually write up that initial piece, which then promoted, some interest, and then initiated this and other conversations. I really appreciate that, and I think that is the sense making, the shared memory, the invitation to collaborate, the opportunity to do so, that I really feel I'd like to see more of over. So thank you very much, Glenn, and everybody else here for making this possible and really, in a sense, supporting it. I really think that's we have come a long ways in GCC,
Glenn has found his
Right.
calling.
despite that some people characterize it as slow.
Glenn, you have to take this to
Yeah.
a university. You have to make us all famous now. You have to figure this out.
yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I really think that we have come upon a kind of a model here for sense making, which is very, very interesting for having a discussion and then doing a write up where you try to clarify different views, create a synthesis, and then you can have a new discussion based on that. And I think this is a very, very interesting model one can use for a combination of spoken video meetings and write-ups, written dialogue, which has a feedback loop between them.
Right.
It's very, very
I
interesting.
commend
over
you for
time.
stepping into that void, Glenn.
Well, this video
Yeah.
is a hold on, Glenn. If you mean this, what I'm hearing you, we've had this discussion. This video itself is a seed to further
It is,
discussion.
yeah, absolutely.
Yes,
It's
very
just
much
like
so. I
many
think this is
steps
a-
on the way.
I think
towards
this is a
more
good example of one that
understanding.
we could use. We could use this as a starting point for
It's a
second
continuation
version two.
point.
It's a
Version 2, yeah,
continuation,
of
and
the
it's
same
also
thing.
a seed for things to come. So it's a very interesting thing, this interaction between these different steps.
As we add Glenn's attention
Oh.
to organizing, which is I think paramount here, as Sam mentioned, to bring it together, but then us pick up his leadership and support him with the tools that we know how, so we don't confuse each other. Because I think one of the biggest problems is once you start going into this stuff, you get editing wars and schisms. So we got to
Yeah.
keep it simple, Trello or whatever, and don't talk to Doug about it until it's shined up to the first version, because he can't handle complexity. Just can't. That the way I see it, he can't handle it. The way he sees complexity, I might not be able to handle it. And I think that's the chores to Glenn to help me see how he sees complexity.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm off. Thank you, guys. Been a rich meeting.
Will somebody help the recording and restart or not for the after show? Some?
Don't know if he heard you, or maybe he's just doing it. He's probably just doing it.
That was a little,
Yeah.
that was distorted, Tease. I'm not quite sure. what you
Oh,
said.
that's it. Okay. Well, the question is, will